And just to lay the groundwork, all the information presented tonight is not medical advice. So don't take it as such. Please mute your lines unless you're the presenter. Submit questions in the chat window. Those that are requesting a certificate of attendance will need to email at this address. I'll put it on up at the end with your first name, last name, and email address. And Dr. Diana Medina will be issuing the certificate. So I'll compile them, I'll send her a spreadsheet, and she'll send them along. So with that, oops, come on. I'd like to discuss, and usually I don't read my slides, but our two speakers are so well known and so accomplished that I would do them a disservice if I would try to wing it. So when you talk about co-occurring, I think Dr. Kenneth Minkoff comes to mind along with Christy Klein. So as you can see on the screen, Kenneth Minkoff is a board-certified psychiatrist with a certificate of additional qualifications in addiction psychiatry. He's a dedicated community psychiatrist, currently clinical assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He's recognized as one of the nation's leading experts on integrated treatment for individuals with co-occurring psychiatric and substance abuse or dual diagnosis, and on the development of integrated systems of care for such people. I'm hearing some feedback. And Christy Klein is the founder and president of Zia Partners, Zia Partners, and board certified psychiatrist as well. Has a master's in business administration from Georgetown in Washington, D.C. Has graduated with distinction with a focus in organizational development and strategic planning. And Dr. Klein is a former medical director for Behavioral Health Services Division, New Mexico Department of Health, and has served as a psychiatric lead for indigent safety net systems for people with serious mental illness, homeless, and victims of acute trauma, and for public mental health and substance abuse systems for state between 1999 and 2003. So I told you that they are very accomplished and I didn't want to do a disservice. So to framework it a little bit more, Dr. Minkoff and Christy will go ahead and go through kind of the framework. So for the first probably 25 to 30 minutes, they'll be explaining kind of their system. And then after that, we'll jump in and answer some questions. So you can go ahead and ask questions. Don't think we're ignoring you, but we're waiting until at least they have the framework explained. So I think we're going to start with Dr. Klein first. And whoops.
So go back, Lori, one. Yeah. So I'm just going to just create a quick frame. So guys, there's a lot of you on the call, and what we're going to do is cover a lot of ground very quickly. And so we hope to have a good discussion afterwards. What?
And someone came on that was unmuted, so I'll go ahead and scour.
Oh, okay. So we hope to have a good discussion after the presentation, but we're pretty sure we're not going to be able to answer all your questions. So you'll see that our email addresses are sitting there on the slide, and Lori is going to make those available. So please feel free to contact us afterwards with any kind of question about anything that we talk about. And what we're going to start with is a story to kind of set the tone for what we're going to be talking about. And Chris is the storyteller of our team. So she's going to start with storytelling.
Thanks, Ken.
Dr. Klein.
So, hello, everyone. I would like to do a little bit of a story that is actually a thread, several events over a period of years kind of tied together with a common theme. And this particular thread for me is very easy to remember because it is all tied to being kind of pushed to the limit in terms of what skills and experience and the the coming into new things and wondering if you're going to live up to the challenge. So when I was in early training in my internship in psychiatry, on the very first week of being there, I happened to find myself in the emergency room, being their psychiatric consult in the evening. And I really did not even have my feet wet at that point. And I met the most amazing man who had, he literally has shaped my entire career. And when I met him, I was standing in the corner quite terrified, and he was brought in by the police tied down to a stretcher. And I watched them wheel him past me, and I was, much to my, I'll give myself a little bit of slack now that I'm older, but I was actually saying to myself, thank goodness that's a medical injury, that's not mine. So I was feeling quite relieved at that moment because this looked like a very severe issue, and I was not going to be the one having to straighten it out, only having a week under my belt. Well, the charge nurse walked by me as they carried him into the bay, and the charge nurse walked by me and she said, "Get ready." And my heart sank into my stomach, and I realized what she meant is this is a person who has serious psychiatric issues, and he's coming your way. So at that moment, I think I literally detached from the world, and everything that I'd ever been taught flew out of my mind. And I was standing there wondering what in the world I could do to help this man, because the situation looked so extreme. So as they were working with him, I began to notice different things. I was watching intensely. And one of the things that I had noticed is that between his ankles on the stretcher was a Bowie knife. And the Bowie knife was quite large and quite scary. And it led me to looking at the man physically, at his body. And what I saw is that he had multiple lacerations. And they were, working on him, settling him down. And what I also saw and what I knew is that he was acutely intoxicated. And as I watched what they were doing, and I was trying very hard to think about how I was going to be helpful, I watched the environment that he was in, and I watched how he was being cared for or managed or whatever you might want to call it. And I watched how nobody was really looking at him. People were doing a lot of things to him, but nobody was really looking at him. And he seemed quite lost, like he really did not know what was going on, and there was no way to relate to anything that was happening. So it struck me as the first thing that I should do is I should probably get him out of this environment once he's okay to move. I should bring him someplace that feels better. And for me, what I knew was that place is back the place where I worked, onto the psychiatric unit at University Hospital. And so I did that thing, wheeled him in his wheelchair across the big quad this was at the VA hospital, and rolled him right up to the door. And big doors open up, wheel him up to the front desk. We're getting checked in, and I realized the same thing, is that nobody's really looking at him. People are doing a lot of things, they're very busy, but they're not actually looking at him. And this struck me as odd, because I had not had, I had not had this kind of experience where individual where you can look at an individual and see that the world is not responding to that person as an individual. And so for me, this became you know, I was like very curious and worried about what this man's life has been like. And so I checked him in and did a little bit more work on him as we got settled in. And you know, he was settled into his room, and we made him more comfortable than he had been, and kind of calms the situation down. And I was writing up, you know, all of the materials that I was expected to be writing up. And you come to the place where you're supposed to write doctor's orders for different things, and there really wasn't anything that was on the doctor's orders that I thought was going to make any significant difference. So it was just kind of a duty. And when I was writing all that down, what I realized is I was becoming increasingly nervous, because what I knew was going to happen in the morning, which was just a few hours away, is I was going to have to literally justify having admitted an intoxicated man onto the psychiatric unit who had superficial lacerations. And in the day, and unfortunately still in some places today, that was something that really wasn't seen as a necessary intervention. And so I got nervous because I was going to have to sort of defend my actions. And the man that my attending, that the man I worked for, was a very towering individual. And he leaned over the top of me when I was telling the story. And the more I spoke, the more contorted his face looked. And I just stepped back and I said, well, you know, you're just going to have to trust me. And I thought maybe I was going to be ejected from the program at that part. But he said, okay, Dr. Klein, you've got 7 days of trust. Okay. And so I breathed a deep sigh of relief. And I spent 7 days with this gentleman. And he told me the story of his life, being a Native American man who had become estranged from all of his family, kind of living on the edge of life, and being brought to his knees one evening, and as he put it, because he couldn't stand to be in his own skin. And what I realized is that the symbol of the Bowie knife was both, you know, the literal instrument of him harming himself, but it was also symbolic of someone trying not to be in their own skin. And as I spent the 7 days with him, just listening to the story and being as available to him as I possibly could be, and really trying to relate to what it must feel like to have lived a life like that, it came the end of our days and together, and it was time for him to leave the unit. And so we did all of the appropriate things, and I watched him leave the unit, wondering if I would actually ever see him again. And I had no idea. I had no idea whether he had been helped or not, if he was ever going to find himself in that situation again or not. And I wished him well, and you know, carried a lot of kind of sorrow about the whole situation around for a long time. And then 3 years, leap forward 3 years, same university hospital, after a lot had transpired in the middle. And I'm standing out on this very same quad, and I hear from behind me a man, and he goes, hey, hey, hey. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, he's too far away. I don't really know who he is, but he knows who I am. And so as he came closer, it was one of those moments where you go, oh my God. And it was a very, you know, I was looking at this man that I knew. It was James, the same man, but he was coming towards me wearing a 3-piece suit. And it was a moment of you know, this really doesn't jive, but I'm so ecstatically happy that he's alive and here he is right here. So we exchanged, you know, a bunch of stories and caught up with each other, and, you know, all in the swirl of that moment in the quad. And, you know, he had told me that he had gotten a job. Actually, he was showing up for his new job at the VA in the finance department. He had gotten a girlfriend, and life was going quite nicely for him. And he said, you know, I've always wanted to tell you, but I haven't, and I need to tell you. He said, you changed my life. And he didn't say you saved my life. He said you changed my life. And I wish I had, but I didn't. I was thinking it. I wish I had had the wherewithal at the moment to say, no, sir, you changed mine. But I was absorbed in what he was saying. And when I asked him, you know, where he was coming from, what he was saying is, he said, you know, that, you know, when I was here, and I said, yeah, you were here for 7 days. And he said, no. You know, when I first came in? And I said, yeah, you know, we both the ward. He said, no, remember when I first came into the emergency room? And I was staggered because I had no idea that he was aware of anything in the emergency room. He was intoxicated, he was in pain, he was being worked over, and I really did not think a human being could be alert to anything that was going on. And he said, I looked across the room, and he said, you were the only person who looked at me. And for me, you know, that stuck in my head of how important it is to take nothing for granted about our interactions with people. And to know that the moment that we know of someone, or we see someone, we meet someone, our process begins, our relationship begins. And it is our opportunity to inspire some degree of hopefulness right from the very beginning of our meeting. And that's what that was his energy for those whole 7 days. And then those whole 7 days became his energy for the rest of the 3 years since I had seen him. And for me, what that did is it lodged very deeply in my psyche, that even though I felt like I did not know what to do, how to help them, I didn't feel like I had the skill set or the knowledge base or anything in my doctor toolkit, I did exactly what was needed. And it was instinctive in a way, because it was not about the man having the conditions, it was about the man. And so embedded in all of the work that, you know, we did, you know, as I was doing the medical director thing for the Department of, for the Behavioral Health Department there in New Mexico, and then all of the work that carries forward into what we do, Ken and I, in terms of our systems change work, it carries forward that there's a very fundamental and intimate connection that happens when we meet people, and that they're extremely brave and they are extremely vulnerable, and the small things can begin a major road to recovery. So we start, and we've always started, Ken and I, when we started working together, thinking about things like, how do we welcome people into care, not as something that is you know, kind of a nice way to proceed, but that welcoming someone is a matter of life and death. And welcoming is all about not how we do things because it is the thing we are supposed to do, but we do the welcoming because it is what is in our heart, and it's what brings us to this work in the first place. And so the whole construct of welcoming has been the foundation of every single thing that Ken and I have done together and the basis of my previous career. So I'm very grateful to James, and I'm very grateful to those early experiences. And I tell this particular story just as grounding. And I know everyone out there has their James, and they have the experience that has shaped and formed how you look at the work that you do and how you look at yourself in the mirror at night. And gratitude is the word, I think, for having had these experiences. So Ken is going to take us through some of the materials here and really talk about how we embedded concepts and procedural stuff into the world of integrated behavioral health care that start with very core principles about what really good care actually is. So Ken, I will flip it back over to you.
Thank you very much. And just to do a quick little sequence, I'll tie the threads together. But so Chris went on to become the medical director for behavioral health services in New Mexico over 20 years ago. And she wound up getting involved in looking at, basically they asked her to learn what it was like in the system as the medical director for people having met them. And her commissioner asked her to do that by sitting on the state mortality review process. And she began learning that, that when they looked at the stories of people who died, a disproportionate number of people who died had co-occurring mental health and substance issues. And a lot of those people could have been James. And they found that when they talked to the families and friends of the people who died, they were told that when those people had come to the door of the system, they were not welcomed and they lost hope. And that led them later, very quickly, within a matter of weeks, to do things that led them to die, sometimes by suicide, but sometimes just because of medical conditions and not taking care of themselves. And that led her back in 20 years ago to reach out, and I had just completed a project for SAMHSA where we did a national project around developing standards for co-occurring. And this is roughly the same time I met Mike and Christy and came out to Arizona and this and that. But Chris invited me to come out to New Mexico and help develop the service system. And one thing led to another. And now we've been married for 11 years and we live in Tucson and we have this little company called Zia Partners. But what we do for a living is we do consultation to systems and organizations all over the United States and the world, doing what we call changing the world, helping systems of all sizes, whether they're states, counties, regions, managed care organizations, provider organizations, programs, organize themselves at every level to be about the needs and hopes of the people and families with complex needs who show up at the door. And you guys who are listening are probably familiar with these kinds of efforts. They have a lot of fancy names, system transformation and integrated systems and blah, blah, blah. But what it boils down to for us is helping systems organize themselves to be about the people who show up. And the biggest driver for doing this are the people themselves, people and families with complexity who show up with desperation at the door of the service system. And the more desperate and complicated you are, the more that you're likely to feel that the system is organized so that getting help is really going to be difficult. Not only do the people we serve experience this, so do those of us who provide services. Most of us went into this business not because we thought this was a cool way to become a millionaire, but because we wanted to be about helping people. And we too go into the system, as we call it, and we too quickly find ourselves, as Chris did in that story, challenged by all these kind of written and unwritten rules of operation that make us feel like our job of helping the desperate people in front of us is also going to be really hard. So what we've been thinking about and what we're inviting you to think with us about today is it's not about just creating a few special programs or hiring a few special people to meet the needs of people with co-occurring mental health and substance use and other complex needs. It's about how do we organize the entire system at every level, every program, every process, every policy, every procedure, every practice, every piece of paperwork, every person providing help with every penny that we have to be about the needs and hopes of the people that we're serving and the values that got us into this in the first place. Next slide, please, Lori. Now, when we start these conversations, we start by, on purpose, putting people into the middle of the conversation that we know that the system is likely not well designed to serve. We call this the complexity challenge. So, and what this means is that there are people and families who have overlapping or multiple types of issues, and systems are usually organized to deal with one thing at a time. So today, we use this slide for all kinds of complexities. Today, our focus is on people with mental health and substance use issues, what we call people with co-occurring conditions or co-occurring disorders or like that. And who are we talking about? We're talking about any person of any age with any combination of any mental health issue, including trauma, and any substance or addictive issue, including gambling or even nicotine dependence, whether or not they've already been diagnosed. We also talk about co-occurring families, which is particularly important in children's services, where one person might have one kind of problem, like a child with an emotional disturbance or an intellectual disability, and another member has another kind of problem, like a family member or caregiver with a substance use issue, so that the family system needs an integrated approach. Now, why are we starting this conversation about changing the system by putting this group of people in the middle of the discussion? Well, first of all, these folks are everywhere. They're in absolutely every corner of the behavioral health system and in the settings operated by all our service partners, whether they're in health, criminal justice, housing, homelessness, child welfare, or the like. In addition, whatever two issues you start with, these folks immediately bring along others. These folks don't just have mental health and substance issues, they have medical issues, cognitive issues, housing issues, legal issues, parenting issues, disability issues, financial issues, and so on. These are folks who are characterized by complexity. And the next thing that we're starting with is rocket scientists that we are. We know that the more complex you are, the worse you're likely to be doing. So these folks are likely to be having the poorest outcomes and the highest cost in our scarce resource services. And their poor outcomes are in every conceivable domain. These folks are more likely to relapse and be rehospitalized. They're more likely to be labeled treatment resistant and non-compliant. They're more likely to engage in self-destructive, suicidal, aggressive, or violent behavior. They're more likely to be victims of trauma, perpetrators of trauma, or both. They're more likely to be in trouble with other systems. They're more likely to cost us a lot of money. And most tragically, as Chris found in New Mexico, these are the folks who are most likely to die, and to die prematurely, often of medical conditions because they're not taking care of themselves. Now, if our job is to design our system to be about the people who need us, then naturally we would be thinking that these folks with co-occurring mental health and substance issues and other kinds of complexity would be specifically, purposefully, and proactively prioritized for care every single place they show up in our system. But what we've experienced, and what you all probably still experience, is exactly the opposite. Folks who are experienced at every level of the system. At the system design, funding, and regulatory level, these are folks who dare to have more than one problem in systems that have been designed and funded historically as if everybody had one problem only, or only one problem at a time. Programs are often similarly designed. So those people working with us in real programs are constantly experiencing a need to contort the client to fit the program, or the program to fit the client. These folks are often experienced as misfits at the level of the skills of most people providing care. Most folks are trained to think of themselves as being a mental health person or a substance person, and not both. So when we encounter someone with co-occurring issues, we immediately experience a misfit between what they need and what we know. And they experience this as well, feeling, oh my goodness, here's another person acting like they don't know what to do with me. Not only are these folks experienced as misfits, we often wind up experiencing them negatively. And part of what Chris was responding to is even 1 week on the job as a junior baby newbie psychiatrist, she had already gotten the sense that somehow admitting someone who was both drunk and suicidal, let alone also Native American, was somehow going to be a no-no. And she was nervous about doing it. Okay, and what we know how this permeates. So these folks don't easily fit into our boxes, they don't follow our instructions, and they tend to stir up feelings in us, ranging from feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, and despair, to frustration, irritation, and rage. And they often inquire those labels that we reserved for the people who make us feel that way. They become labeled as the antisocial, manipulative, borderline, med-seeking, non-compliant sociopaths, and we're often introduced to them by our colleagues before we've ever met them. Well, guess who's back? And you're going to deal with them this time. So these folks who are having the poorest outcomes and the highest cost are not only not prioritized for care, they're folks we've been programmed directly or indirectly to be holding at arm's length. So one of the starting places, as Chris was saying, is in redesigning how we approach services at any level, is how do we build our entire system and all parts of us so that people with co-occurring mental health and substance issues and other complex needs are specifically, purposefully, and proactively welcomed for help, exactly as they are, wherever and whenever they show up. Now, the second challenge is, what are we going to welcome them into? Next slide, please, Lori. And we call this the Hope Challenge, because this is what James experienced when Chris looked him in the eye and saw him as a person. Is he experienced a sense of not only being welcomed, but he experienced some hope that maybe he wasn't going to have to feel invisible for his whole life. And of course, you know, we know, all of us know, that hope is the driver that mobilizes people to do the difficult work of getting better. Unfortunately, the more challenges you have, the more likely you are to feel like your hope is being taken away. And for those of us who provide services, the more challenges the people we serve have, the more likely we are to feel like we don't know how to help them, so we start indirectly being not hopeful. Okay, we would be hopeful for you if we knew how to fix you or if we had the perfect place to send you. When in fact, it's the people with greatest challenges who we don't exactly know how to fix that need our hopefulness the most. So when we welcome people in, the next piece of foundation is we're welcoming people into hope. And our system needs to be in the hope business, which is an organizational feature of saying, how do we produce the product of welcoming and hope? Not just billable units, but welcoming and hope, so that every person, every family, especially those who have the greatest numbers of challenges, are inspired when they meet us with hope that by virtue of having met us, they're in better position now, they're less alone, they have a partner who's going to accompany them on the journey to achieve a happy, hopeful, productive, and meaningful life. Now, next slide, please. Now, when we talk, keep going until next one, and then the one after that. Okay, so when we're talking about building systems of care with a foundation of welcoming and hope, there's another reason why we start with people with co-occurring issues and complexity, which is that not only are these folks doing poorly and not only are they folks who often feel like misfits, there's a lot of them. So the prevalence of co-occurringness and complexity is so great that we say co-occurring is an expectation. Oh, you're too far ahead. Go backwards.
This one?
There you go. Thank you. That co-occurring or complexity is an expectation, not an exception, pretty much everywhere we look. And I can go through tedious epidemiologic data if you want, but you just know this if you're a provider from what you see every day. Okay. And so it's not so much that we don't know this. What's pretty striking is the degree to which all of our service system with limited resources has been designed as if this wasn't true. So in systems with limited resources, we take the people with the poorest outcomes and the highest costs. We keep putting them in to single disorder design services, guaranteeing poorer outcomes and higher costs. All the while, we keep wishing for new pots of money, special programs, special people to deal with the weirdos. And they're not the weirdos, they're the normal people. And we're never going to get enough new money to deal with them all. So this becomes a major driver for change. If we want to design our systems and services to be about the people who need us, then we need to design every service, all services, on the assumption that the next person showing up is going to have co-occurring issues and other complexity, so that every service is designed to welcome, inspire, and provide integrated helpfulness to individuals and families with complex needs. Next slide. So in the framework that we use that was mentioned in my introduction, and it has a fancy jargony name that you can ignore, the basic message is every program in the system has to become a co-occurring program. Okay, you can use all the nice, cool jargon that you want, but every program has to be a co-occurring program. Why? Because there are co-occurring people in it. And so the program needs to be thinking about how to design itself to meet their needs. Not only every program, but every person providing help has to think of themselves and be organized and supported to be in the co-occurring helpfulness business, because those are the people that are going to be in their caseloads. And moving from where we are over time to get to this endpoint is a process that we call a recovery process for systems. Moving forward slowly, a step at a time in an organized way. And like any good recovery program, it has 12 steps that we've figured out. Next slide. So when we say a program is a co-occurring program, or to use a little bit more jargony stuff, co-occurring, capable, or complexity capable, what we say to that program, and for any of you who run programs, think about this. If back in the beginning of time, when your program was first invented, if you knew then what you know now about who you actually were going to be serving in terms of their complexity, and if you knew then what is known now, which I'm going to share with you in the next few minutes, about how to actually help them in an organized way with multiple issues as part of what you do, how would you have organized your program, your policies, procedures, practices, all the things you do to help your staff do their jobs, on the assumption that the modal person you're seeing is going to be co-occurring? And if you see people who are not, though, they're really easy, but design yourself around complexity. Now noted, every program in the system is a co-occurring program, becomes a co-occurring program, but every program has a different job. And the job is based on what it's already designed to be doing. Is it a case management program for adults with serious mental illness? Is it residential addiction treatment for pregnant and parenting women? School-based outreach for kids who are having behavior problems in schools? Whatever. Knowing that whatever you're trying to do, you're going to be dealing with folks who have complex issues. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. Not only every program, every person providing help. Okay, and so we're not talking about everybody going out and getting dual licenses and multiple certificates and degrees. Whether you have 1 license, 2 licenses, 6 licenses, or none, you're a cool peer support person helping people with your own lived experience. You're the person working the Saturday night overnight shift in the residential substance program when all the clients are trading psych meds and being really weird. Whatever it is you do, our job is to help give you the tools and instructions inside your job and level of training and supportive to the people with complexity who are already sitting in front of you. Next slide. Now, Chris and I have a whole bunch of tools and stuff that we're not going to go into, but if you want to learn more about them, you can either contact us or go to our website for all different kinds of programs, because we don't just do mental health and substance, we do integration with health and intellectual disability and criminal justice and housing and children's stuff, and you know, it's all complicated. But we have toolkits for folks to use to move forward at all different levels, at the program level, at the system level, and so on. And the next slide. And we have tools for staff and 12 steps for everybody. And it's a whole lot of fun. Okay, let's move along. The big question is to get everybody thinking that this is an achievable vision. Okay, and so folks think, well, wouldn't it be nice if this was like this, but how do you do this? Next slide. So the good news is that we actually know how to help people with complex needs. And, you know, as I said, you know, back in the 20 years ago when Chris first met me, you know, we had developed this report and we've refined this stuff since then. But, you know, there's a tendency for any time you see somebody special, you want some special evidence-based special program to send them to. And, you know, that's very costly and it's very complicated. And a lot of times the people don't want to go to the special program. And if we had one, we usually don't. And what we did back in the late 90s in the SAMHSA project, and what Chris and I have been doing since then, is we've been getting in the habit of taking the research on special stuff and picking up the cover of what they did and saying, what did they actually do that's helpful? And over the years, what we've learned for all kinds of complexity, including co-occurring mental health and substance, that we've learned that it gets, the more you look, the simpler it is to figure out how to help people. And there are ultimately 6 very basic principles of being helpful. Each principle is tied to some pretty simple, straightforward interventions that can be organized into policy, procedure, and practice in any kind of program and performed by any cool group of people trying to be helpful within the resources that they have. And the key elements of this are twofold. One is the more complicated the world is, and the more complicated the system is, the simpler you want to make this. And one of our big problems as a profession, behavioral health, is that we tend to make things so complicated and so jargony and so full of gobbledygook and techno speak that we don't understand what we're doing, let alone the people we're trying to help. The second thing is, one of the reasons we have such a hard time is not that doing the things that work is hard, like Chris was describing. It's that we spend so much time doing stuff that doesn't work. And so shifting our energy from doing a lot of things that don't help and doing the things that help and organizing them into our program infrastructure, that's the process of change that we're talking about. So as I said, there are 6 basic principles and they're tied to interventions. I'm going to illustrate them for you in a minute. Okay? Next. In a big system or little system or big organization, small organization, there is an organizational change process that can be used to help all different kinds of systems and organizations make progress. And we call it the recovery process for systems. The technical name is customer-oriented continuous quality improvement. And so, you know, there's a bit of an art to structuring in any system or setting a process by which all the parts of the system work in an organized quality improvement partnership, and each part owns its own process of improvement to make progress. And there are empowered change agents to work in partnership with leadership to create change. And ultimately, the change is not just training, which doesn't really get you far, but it's about changing the actual policies, procedures, and practices to sustain the change that you're trying to create. And I'm going to be illustrating that as I talk about the principles in a minute. And because it's a recovery process for systems, we often describe it as like a big 12-step meeting for a whole system of care, where everybody comes together, and your job when you come is to be helpful and be about your own experience, strength, live within prayer, the accept the cannot as everybody else, the courage to change the things you can, your own work, your own team, your own agency, your own program, whatever your span of control is, and the wisdom to know the difference. And if in an organized partnership, if everybody gets busy starting to make progress and keeps going, then the whole system will actually change quite a lot. Okay, so let's now move to I'm going to move through the principles so you can understand the principles and interventions. And these are things that can be applied anywhere, including they're very helpful even for people who are self-managing, as well as for family members who are supporting, to think about, you know, how do I actually think about this in a way that's helpful to the person with complexity that I know and care about. Next slide. Move through, there's a couple of slides we're going to slide through here quickly because we're not, keep going. Go to the principal slide. Next one. Keep going. Yay. Okay, here's the first principle. It's called Principles Made Simple. First principle is complexity is an no, you went too far. Back one. There we go. Complexity is an expectation. So we want to incorporate that expectation in a welcoming manner in everything we do. And Chris started to talk about that. Now, when we're talking about welcoming here, we're not talking about simply being nice. We're talking about welcoming as an organized piece of practice development that most of you are familiar with in terms of what we call customer service. And if you've ever had customer service training, then you know that they don't just teach you to be nice to easy people, they teach you on purpose exactly how to be nice to people who are challenging. And the striking thing in our world, in the world of behavioral health, is that we don't do this routinely. And so part of this, you know, helping everybody say we're a co-occurring program means we're in the co-occurring business. And when people with co-occurring stuff show up, we need to be happy and welcome them exactly as they are. So this starts with basic welcoming. Hi there. You're one of those folks who has lots of issues. Seems like you may be hearing voices. It smells like you've had something to drink to get up the nerve to come in today. You have all these physical issues. Your family wants nothing to do with you. You're in trouble with your probation officer and you just lost your housing. You know, you're the kind of person that we most need to be serving because you're likely to be having the hardest time. We know it couldn't have been easy for you to show up here today. Thank you for coming. You're in the right place. We're really, really glad you're here. Our job when we meet you is not to refer you someplace or to fix you or perfect you or tell you pages of rules. Our job is to get to know you, inspire you with hope, and help you get connected to us and anyone we meet along the way who can help you with all your issues so you can have a happy and beautiful life. Now, there's nothing in that speech that's rocket science. The question that we have to ask ourselves is how well organized are we by policy, procedure, and practice? So that when people show up, everybody in our organization knows that that's the kind of thing that we're supposed to say. And then we talk about things like intermediate welcoming. What if we have a rule that says we never trash talk about people that we're serving based on their complexity or anything else, even if they're not listening, any more than we would use racial slurs behind their back? And then there's advanced welcoming. What happens when people show up at the door of the system displaying symptoms we rather they didn't have? So they show
Hey, Ken, I think you froze. Christy, Dr. Klein, if you can hear us, if you can tell Ken that he's frozen.
I can hear you, and I'm going to see if he wants to switch places with me so that, because I'm assuming you can hear me, right, Lori?
I can hear you, and he just dropped, so maybe he's going to pop back in or
Okay.
come up as Christy. Either way, we're flexible and we're welcoming.
Okay.
It's
All
a
right.
very complex issue.
It is, and we are fully integrated, so we can actually places. So.
So we'll take a moment, and hopefully so far you've been enjoying our speakers. I found it very hopeful. I said, oh, I need to go back and get a degree in that. I want to sign up.
Okay, so
Okay, can you hear?
Yes.
We hear and see you.
Okay, good.
great. So where did you lose me?
There you go.
You were talking about being more than welcome, how to help people be welcoming to the most complex
A
people.
little welcoming script about, hi there, you're one of those
The
folks.
advanced welcoming.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I was talking about advanced welcoming when somebody shows up at one door with symptoms we'd rather they didn't have. So somebody shows up at the substance door, you know, feeling suicidal or hearing voices, or somebody shows up at the mental health door, or any door for that matter, you know, smelling of alcohol and kind of unsteady on their feet. And, you know, how do we organize ourselves so in that moment, you know, our job is to help that person feel really, really happy that when they were in crisis, they had the good sense to show up in the place where people are paid to help them, rather than thinking our job in that moment is to tell them they behave badly or inappropriately or they don't belong there and try to send them somewhere else as quickly as we can. So welcoming gets pretty deep pretty quick. And it isn't long before pretty much every place can get started thinking, how do we do a better job welcoming the people like James who show up in our door with complex needs, not thinking we have to fix them, but simply welcome them as they are and help them feel like they made a good decision showing up. Now, part of that, as you move through this slide, means looking at rules that may get in the way. Like if you smell of alcohol, we won't see you, and all kinds of things like that. And welcoming also means getting really good at welcoming the opportunity to identify all your issues and put them on the tables and count them so that we know who you are and where these people are, so that we can actually figure out how to help you over time. Very often we try to avoid identifying issues because we're scared to find them. And that's part of what gets in the way. And a lot of our systems are built so that we don't even collect the data on who the co-occurring people are. And as Chris often said in New Mexico, if we're not counting you, it's because our system is organized as if you didn't count. So just getting better at things like welcoming and screening and counting is already a step in the right direction. So at this point, people will often say, all right, well, we'll welcome them and screen them. But once we welcomed and screened them, where do we send them? Which is an approach that we call welcome and out. And this brings us to the next principle. What do we welcome people into? Next slide. So the next principle is we welcome people into a relationship. And when you look at all of the research about helping people with complex needs, the thing that is at the bottom of success is getting people engaged with relationships that stay with them over time and help them with all their issues in small steps over time to achieve success. So for example, the best research on the fancy special programs for people with serious psychotic illness and substance use issues who are not terribly interested in anything we're selling when they show up, best treatment in the world takes 3 to 4 years for about half the people to be consistently sober. And during that time, almost all the rest have made significant progress in the sense of they may still be using, but they're using a lot less and getting into less trouble. So,
you know, one of the things we do is we start to think, oh, we're going to try to fix you in 3 weeks or 3 months or whatever. We start to get impatient, bounce people all over the place trying to fix them faster, which actually makes things much worse. So the relationship itself has characteristics. It's a partnership. We work with people. It's empathic. We listen to people's stories, not just look at their symptoms. It's hopeful. We purposefully think of ourselves in the hope business and spend time emphasizing people's ability to articulate and support their ability to achieve a vision of a happy, hopeful, meaningful, and successful life, which helps them have the energy to make progress. And it's strength-based. And by strength-based, you know, what we mean is very specific. So in our work, we very often say that we're being strength-based, but often we're not actually being strength-based the way we need to be successful with folks with complexity. And what that means, and most of any of you who are providers will know this, what it usually means is that we do an assessment of some sort, and after 12 pages of filling out deficits, we have a little box near the end that says strengths. We're not sure what to put. So we write things like nice teeth, loves plants, friendly smile, plays guitar. And we say, okay, that's done. Now let's move along to deal with deficits. But that's not what strength-based is. The literature on strength-based means that everything you do in this relationship is built within a strength-based framework. And the way of thinking about it is twofold. First, the people we're working with, they go up and down in their lives just like we do. But when they do that, we call them chronic relapsers. In a strength-based framework, there is no such thing. There are only people like all of us who are recurrently successful. And the thing that's most interesting about people with complex challenges is the times when they're able to figure out how to make some progress and do well, because those are the strengths they're using for each of their issues that we want to build on. Okay? So in the strength-based framework, we actually spend time looking at what the person is doing right, so we can reinforce their strengths for each of their issues and help them to do it better. Okay, so this creates the foundation that takes us to the next principle. Next, okay. So the next principle, which seems pretty obvious, but it's very important, is all people with complex issues are not the same. Now, this, again, seems pretty simple, but what we know is that people will listen to it, they'll nod, and then at the end, they'll say, I need a good co-occurring program, as if all co-occurring programs are the same and all co-occurring people are the same. And they're not. People with co-occurring issues have some kind of mental health issue and some kind of substance issue and all kinds of other needs. And what we need to do first is get to know who they actually are. They're not they're not a co-occurring. They're not defined by their diagnosis. Even they're actually defined as a person who has, you know, individual experiences and challenges. And the more we take the time to just listen to what they're going through and get to know them the way Chris did with James, the better we are able to figure out how to be most helpful. So that's step one. Step two, it's very helpful to understand some of the simple ways of thinking about these distinctions. So let's just start with substance use. All substance issues are not the same. Okay, I mean, there are different substances, obviously that's part of it, but there are people who never use substances, and there are people who use substances. Not everyone who uses substances, even people with a mental illness, have a substance use disorder, okay? But everyone makes decisions about substance use. So we can get interested in people's decision-making, even with whether they have a disorder or not. If people are using substances, you know, we have to figure out how and why they're using. and whether or not the use is causing them difficulties, and help them to make over time better decisions about how to use in such a way that it doesn't mess up their lives, including screwing up their mental illness. But if they're using unwisely, what we call substance misuse, that doesn't mean they have a substance use disorder. It only means that when you have a serious psychiatric disability, the threshold for safe use is very, very, very low, much lower than if you don't have a psychiatric disability. And then we have people who have substance use disorders, what we sometimes call the brain disorder of addiction. And like any other disorder, the brain disorder of addiction can exist in different levels of severity as well. Okay, so, but the characteristics of the brain disorder of addiction are, first of all, it's a brain disease like other mental illnesses. It's a brain disease in which there are chemical and structural changes in the brain that are often irreversible in adults when they get severe enough. And they render the person unable to reliably control their substance use even when they want to. And the addicted brain is not directly addicted to the substance, it's addicted to its own internal chemical state of being high, which is different for different people and different substances. And I'm not going to go into all that right now. But the important thing is when someone has addiction, they're not just making poor choices about their substance use. Their brain is actually on the other team. And even when they decide they want to stop using, their brain chemically is creating impetus for them to keep using. So they need help to gang up with them against their own brain to be successful, just as with other types of mental illness. And the help is psychosocial help as well as often medication help. So, and the same thing is true for mental health issues. There are different levels of severity ranging from painful feelings to mild to moderate mental illnesses to severe psychiatric disabilities. And people with co-occurring issues can have any combination, and we have to figure out what they do. And because of this, different programs have different jobs. There are programs that are designed to work with people with serious mental illness who might have all kinds of substance use issues. And there are programs designed to work with people with addiction who might have all kinds of mental health issues. And so every program has to organize itself around the population that it's most likely to serve. And in a system, we want all the programs not only to get good with their people, but to help other programs with those people, so that more people get what they need in a single door and fewer people need duplicate or parallel services or fall between the cracks. Okay, next principle. Next slide. Okay.
Principle 4, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, principle 4. So here's the next principle. Again, this is simple, but it's important. When you say, a lot of times people say, well, which problem is primary? Which should we treat first? Which comes first? All this kind of stuff. And all of that gets us into the wrong rabbit hole. So the principle is when people have multiple issues, each issue should be treated as primary. Okay. And we're talking about here not just diagnostic issues, mental illnesses, substance use disorders, physical conditions. We're also talking about housing, legal issues. Okay, so when people have multiple conditions, each condition is primary. And the best intervention for people with multiple conditions is the best next step intervention for that condition at the same time. So the way we help people with complexity is the same way we help ourselves in our own lives. We look at each issue, we figure out the very best next step that we can and will do, and we figure out how to take it. And the next steps can be really small. If you make this too complicated for yourself so you don't understand it, guaranteed the client won't understand it either. So make it smaller and simpler. Next step interventions can include both medication and psychosocial interventions for mental illness, addiction, physical health, and then usually psychosocial interventions for things that you can't treat with medication, like being on probation or needing a place to live. So the whole point is you take each thing as primary And you say, it's not really that important how you got there. What's important is we help you figure out that you're going to stay there unless we help you do something different. So let's help you make progress in small steps over time. Next principle. Okay. Here's now one of the thing we have to do is we have to figure out what the right next step intervention is. And this principle helps us to organize that in a very important way. Because all of us in our lives have multiple issues too. And all of us try to figure out how to make progress with our issues in order to achieve our goals of a happy life. And our clients, just like us, have multiple issues. And just like us, people are not in the same place for each issue at the same time. That is, we move through a process in addressing issues that's called moving through stages of change. And it's very common when people have multiple issues that they're in different stages for different issues. So some people might say, well, I want to work on my mental health stuff, but I don't think I have a problem with substances. I only drink because I'm depressed. And some people may say, I want to work on my substance issue, but don't call me mentally ill. And some people may say, well, this substance is a problem like methamphetamine, but not that one. Marijuana is perfectly fine. And I have a medical card that tells me it's okay to use. So the way we approach this is that this is normal and that people are in different stages for different issues. And integrated service means finding the next step for each issue that is stage matched. So it says integrated services involve stage matched interventions for each condition, stage matched interventions and stage matched outcomes. Next slide. And the stages of change are, you're pretty familiar to many of you. We try to make them simple with these little sentence prompts. Pre-contemplation, meaning I think, don't bug me. Contemplation, I'm willing to think, but I don't want to change. Preparation, next slide. I'm ready to take a first step and I need some help to know how to start. Early action, I'm doing some things, but not everything. So just help me keep going. Late action, next slide. I'm doing everything I can for this issue, but I'm not perfect yet, so I need help to get better. Maintenance, I'm stable and trying not to go backwards. So if somebody has 6 issues, they may be in different stages for each, and your plan with them is to meet them exactly where they are, not struggle with them, and help them take that small step forward for each issue, and give them big rounds of applause for making some progress. So we call that integrated stage matched interventions for each condition. It's one of the fundamental best practices for helping people with complexity. Stage of change and which issue you care most about is likely going to determine where you're most wanting to be engaged initially. And wherever you show up, we help you get connected to other things based on your stage of change for the other issues. Next principle. So the final principle is, what do we do when we're actually trying to help you? And, one of the things, so it says adequately supported, adequately rewarded skill-based learning for each condition. And what that means is what we've learned for no matter what the condition is, whether it's losing weight, managing diabetes, stopping alcohol use, managing your schizophrenia, getting new housing and keeping it, getting a job and keeping it, staying out of jail. It's not just telling people what to do. We're very good at that. Here's your recommendations. Can you repeat them after me? Do you promise to do them? Yes. That doesn't work. We have to help people learn the skills they need to succeed. And we don't teach people the skills they need just by talking to them. We have to help them practice. So we help people learn with small steps of practical learning, teaching people skills for self-management and skills for asking for help for the things they can't manage themselves for each issue. We need to teach people skills for how to use medication properly and how to ask for help from doctors, and other kinds of skills for managing symptoms and feelings and other kinds of social situations and so forth. And give people rounds of applause, positive contingent reward to be jargony, for each tiny step of progress. And we have to build that approach into the way we do things. And we have to eliminate a lot of the pressures that make us try to get people to learn things too quickly and don't give them enough focus on teaching them the things they need to learn in order to be successful. Okay? So if you put this all together, next slide. Next slide. If you put this all together, the idea is that every program can start to utilize the interventions based on these principles to design within its own mission and resources for its own population, the ability to be a co-occurring, hopeful, welcoming, hopeful, co-occurring program for the people it's serving, so that those people can be welcomed, engaged into empathic, hopeful, continuing recovery and support partnerships, where they're helped to address each of their primary issues in small steps with adequately supported, adequately rewarded, strength-based, skill-based, stage-matched, community-based learning for each issue, so that everybody, wherever they show up, can be engaged and helped to take small steps forward, so to make progress with all their issues, so they can achieve the goal of having happy, hopeful, successful, beautiful lives, which they're capable of achieving and which they all deserve to get. So I'm going to stop there, and Chris and I are going to engage you in questions and conversation. I've been talking, so I've been looking at what's in the chat. But Lori, where do you want to start?
Okay, we can start with, let me go back to the top of the questions. What are options for care if a family member refuses treatment? How do you meet them? How do you get them to agree upon something? Find something that they're willing to work for?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. So, I'm not sure what kind of treatment they're refusing, and exactly what the situation is, but what is usually the dynamic in those situations is the person who cares about them sees that they're in trouble and is coming at them, trying to let them know how messed up they are and they really need to do something different. And so the person is, tends to experience that as kind of, making them feel worse than they already do, and they're feeling pretty bad already. So the starting place, and this seems weird and paradoxical, but the starting place is, first of all, to love them, because it's your love, not nagging, that's going to help them do anything different at all. And I'm not saying you should ignore them if they're doing something that's highly risky, because you need to make sure that they're safe. But in the short run, be about welcoming and hope, and let people know that you love them as they are, and that you want to partner with them to help them figure out how they can have the kind of life that they would feel proud of and be happy. And to figure out, is there a starting place in their universe that they can get help with? Now, the other piece that Chris and I often talk about is, as a family member, you don't have experience doing this. You've not done this before. You've not been trained to figure out how to approach this. So start by getting help for yourself. Find somebody who you can talk to about your situation, who has some experience with this, and see if they can help you figure out a good approach. And, without going into lots of iterations, because it really depends on the situation. Sometimes the person can be engaged with that person as a way of helping you, because you're experiencing distress, and maybe they can do something to help you feel less distressed. Maybe there are some strategies where there are things they would like from you that you can tie into things that they can do to help you feel better. It takes a bit of art, but it all starts with the idea that welcoming hope and love and caring for folks and helping them see that you know, you're looking for that, you know, is the most important thing.
On top of that one, we had a question that said, it's hard to stay hopeful when progress is so slow. Any suggestions for a provider? So I'm almost thinking that whatever progress you reward, but what would you say to providers that feel like it's so slow?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the things where we set ourselves up from the very beginning, is really not comprehending how difficult this is for people. And, you know, we have, you know, we come at this thinking that our role in all of this is to help people move on with their lives, do well, and have the life that they actually desire. And the ability of us to do that is not entirely within our control. And so we feel frustrated when the things that we can control don't lead to the outcome fast enough. And so one of the things is to say, well, let's roll it all the way back to the beginning and say, what work are we actually doing? What is our role? What is our job? And our job is not to make that life happen. Okay, that's not our responsibility. That's the responsibility of the person. Our job is to be in partnership with the person and help support them make all these tiny little steps, and to step back and recognize that those are actually miraculous. And if we're looking at it from that angle, there's a lot of joy in this job, because you move from thinking like it's not fixed yet, it's not done yet, to saying, my goodness, you know, look at that amazing piece of effort to go from point A to point B. Even though it's small, it's a miracle. And that step builds on another step, builds on another. So it's a matter, I think, to some degree of perspective. But the additional thing about this is that all of the way that we've designed our rules puts us in that box. So you only have so many appointments, you know, that you can have. There's only so much time we can spend with you. There's only so many things that we're allowed to do. So we have constructed our world in such a way that it's very difficult for us to be in the hopeful space. Our world tells us to be in the hurry up space.
Yeah, let me add two things. One thing that I know has been helpful for both of us is, you know, the more that you can recognize that the people we're trying to help here they may have different issues, but they're on the same journey that we are, the easier it is to be patient with your journey, with their journey, because you recognize the slowness of your own. So, you know, if you've achieved perfect happiness in 6 months or something, then maybe you have a right to feel impatient, but most of us have not. And we have far fewer challenges, but we're still working on them a little bit at a time. So when we say things to ourselves like they're going so slow, you know, as Chris is saying, compared to what? You know, here's somebody with 12 issues who took 2 months to make some significant steps forward. And yay, that's amazing. I mean, that could be pretty rapid. So, you know, it's our own little tapes that often create that sense of frustration. And when you take that out of the way and you just get connected to the person's process, as Chris is saying, the amazingness of their progress at whatever pace becomes clearer.
And this is there's a great deal of significance behind this, because there's a spiral that happens. If I'm in the partner helping business and I'm watching the person struggle, then I want to do more to help them. And then as they struggle more and they cross over into the world of being, you know, in a little bit more dangerous situation, maybe they're getting sicker, or maybe their social support is falling apart, and we're witness to this. We want to speed it up, because we don't want that to happen. We want to speed it up. The faster that we go, the more pressure that we put on the situation, and hopefully not the person, but invariably the person, the more we've depositioned ourselves to be helpful. So
Right.
Just when we need it the most, which is when the person is doing poorly, Just when we need it the most is when we flip ourselves around and go into the framework of saying, I need to push harder, I need to see more needs to happen so that I don't feel anxious that this person is going down a path which doesn't look very great.
So it's part of this, you know, part of what we do when we're working with programs is, you know, to create policies and procedures. What do you do when somebody's having a hard time? And so because programs tend to actually like, oh, somebody broke the rules, now we have to punish them and we're going to teach them a lesson, and it actually causes things to get worse. And our frustration gets us out of the right relationship and into things that actually the person picks up on our frustration, and that doesn't help them. They go backwards. So using these principles to create structure. What do you do when the person you're caring about is having a hard time? Step one, welcome. Oh, I'm so happy that you're connected with me. I can see that you're struggling. I'm so glad that we have this relationship, and I can sit with you and figure out with you about what to do now. Hope. You know, let's remind ourselves of your hopeful goals, because when you're struggling is exactly when you tend to lose sight of the fact that those goals are still there. Strength. Let's look at all the things you've been doing right before you started to slip backwards, so that we can remind you of how capable you are. And let's find 1 or 2 baby steps forward that can help you turn around if that's what you decide to do. And now you've repositioned the whole thing, so you're a helpful ally building on these principles rather than contributing to a sense of negativity and frustration.
And another question that came in, or Christy, do these principles take into consideration cultural differences? So complexity due to just cultural differences or trauma? Yeah.
That's an interesting thing that we talk to people a lot about. So if you look at the core aspects of this, so welcoming, empathy, hope, strength, the kinds of things that are fundamental to human nature and human progress, they have to go through different cultural filters, because one thing that might feel welcoming to one set of people who have a certain way of seeing the world may be the very thing that is unwelcoming to another set of people. So when we're working with programs and, you know, we've got the team involved, it's a discussion about, you know, how do we be not just culturally aware, because that's not enough. How do we be responsive? And there's a lot of conversation that has to happen by the team, because not everyone actually is seeing everything. So it takes a team to kind of look at this through different eyes. So when you're thinking about these kinds of things, like, does this apply to the world of children? Does this apply to immigrant and refugee populations? Does this apply to you know, people who have substantial resource versus those people who don't? And you say, okay, well, take the core concepts and then ask yourself, who are the people who are standing in front of me, and what would their experience be if we did this or if we did that? You don't drop the concept and say, because you're a different, you know, individual from a different community, welcoming doesn't apply. It's, how does welcoming apply? And the more that you get in conversation like that as a team, the more you actually become culturally responsive, as opposed to just simply aware.
Yeah, there's a term called cultural humility, you know, that some of you may have heard. And the whole application of these principles from our perspective, seeing people do them, is that the whole thing comes from humility. I mean, cultural is just a component of it. And by doing it, it makes things easier. So it's one of the things about this, that once you get the hang of it, it makes everything easier, because so much of what we bring in is struggle based on our own desire to control things in the person we're trying to help that we can't control. So, you know, so part of what we teach people is let the person teach you who they are. Let the person teach you what feels welcoming. Let the person teach you what their hopeful goals are and help them to feel more inspired. Help them build their hopeful goals, not yours, theirs. Help them find their strengths. Show them things they're doing right that they may not even know they're doing, and help them discover that. And help them share with you their experiences of their illnesses and how they understand that, and how they understand what they're doing in the context of their culture, or, as for most people, cultures, because most people have multiple cultures that influence the way they think about things.
Okay, we have a question about what about Asperger's syndrome or without substance abuse that's co-occurring, or any DD condition, developmental condition as a part of a co-occurring.
And the I'm not. So the what about is, yes. So one of the things we're learning, first of all, and we've done some work. We did a project in the whole state of Iowa with what they called multi-occurring disability statewide, which were any combinations of intellectual developmental disability, acquired brain injury, substance issues, mental health issues, and trauma. Okay, and we had all the different providers working in a common direction. And so we're always dealing with folks who have lots of interesting different combinations. So, the thing about something like Asperger's is that, these are folks who require, a way of positioning yourself with them to be able to create engagement and relationship. Okay, and it's not like you can give somebody a piece of medication and their Asperger's goes away. So this is an ongoing issue. And the thing we're recognizing, not only about Asperger's and other autism spectrum disorders, but all kinds of intellectual disability related activities, is that the more that we support folks like this to live independently, part of their independent living is that they have to make choices about substance use. And for many of them, using substances becomes a way of socializing and engaging that, seems to be beneficial, even though because their brains are impaired already, there are many more risks. So helping people, working in partnership with them to help them figure this out is our job. And, if you're working already with people who have Asperger's syndrome, then you've developed some skills and some practice for how to talk to folks. The issue about addressing the co-occurringness of them is simply sitting with them and helping them in a style that fits them to think through choices and pros and cons, and think through how they can feel hopeful in the context of their life about achieving some meaningful goals. So it doesn't seem to them that, getting drunk in the short run is the only thing they can really count on to have a better life. And conversely, when people in the spectrum, so to speak, enter other kinds of services, it's helpful to realize that just like for other kinds of psychiatric or cognitive disabilities, you may have to adapt what you're doing to make it easier for that person to succeed. Okay, and that, if somebody is, for whatever reason, they come into a substance program and they're somewhere on the spectrum, it's perfectly fine to create special adaptations in that environment so that they can feel successful, be successful, and to help everybody else in the program, including the other clients, know how to be supportive of them, rather than just hoping that they'll behave just like everybody else, because they're not going to. So, and once you kind of get that framework and actually write even policy instructions for yourself about how to do it, becomes a lot easier than when you feel like every time somebody shows up who's complicated, they're challenging a whole framework that's been built around simplicity.
We had a question What do we do when someone is in a psychiatric break, not just having a hard time? How do we welcome that person? Do we remind them of their goals, or welcoming a substitute and love a substitute for medication?
Lori, can you read this or tell the second part of what you said?
How do we welcome that person in a psychotic break? Do we remind them of their goals? Are we welcoming, and are love and welcoming a substitution for medication at that moment in that psychiatric crisis?
Right. So I'll speak kind of generally, a framework. So when someone is in crisis of any kind, that is the most important time to be welcoming. It is the most important time to be responsive to what the person is actually wanting, even in the moment when they may not be making a lot of sense. But being attuned to what's happening to that person, having your eyes and your ears open, and being very in the space of saying, I can respond to this person in a way that can either elevate the situation, or I can depress the situation based on how I interact. And there's always an opportunity. This is something that I think the more you do this kind of work and the further down the path you get in this, the more you see people and you realize that we're missing a lot of opportunity, particularly in the moments of crisis, because that is a point in time for that person where things are very relevant. Okay, even though we may be thinking the world is falling apart, that person is having a very pointed experience. So you want to do things in that setting that don't exacerbate the immediate situation, but you don't want that person walking away from their psychotic experience and in their recovery feeling like when they're in crisis, it's a bad thing to be in front of the people who are paid to help them because the crisis was made worse.
Or their family members.
Or their, right. So if you'll entertain me just for a moment, just a living example of this. There was a woman once who came into the psychiatric emergency services when I was on call, and she was very psychotic. She'd been brought in by the police, and she was another person who was actually brought in on a stretcher. I don't know why I see so many people brought in on stretchers, but she was brought in on a stretcher. And the thing I noticed about her is that she had a Bible on her chest. She couldn't move her hands or anything. They're kind of tied down, but she had a Bible on her chest. And she was looking at me and she was saying I was the devil woman and she wanted to eat my liver. And I don't exactly know where that came from, but that's what she was saying. And when she got agitated for my standing there, I backed up and her Bible fell on the floor. And just kind of reflexively, and after, thinking about it retrospectively, that Bible was the thing she was carrying for her safety. It was her main focus. It was the thing that she was holding on to for dear life, even though she couldn't touch it. So I just reflexively bent down and picked it up. And I could have put it on the desk, or I could have put it, on a chair, but I put it right back where it was, because I didn't want to take her hopefulness away. She needed that. And I think just the simple act of doing that helped her stay a little bit more in the moment. Did that mean that I would not consider helping her with medications because there had been some exchange that it was actually at a deeper level? No. I mean, whatever tool is helpful for people, it's a tool. The thing about when people are in psychotic crises is to do as little damage as possible to that person, and to have that person understand as best as they can that whatever you're doing is done with the intention of helping them in that moment, and that there's opportunities to think through as you go down the line of things that you want to do and how to do them.
Yeah, let me add a couple of things. So, so one thing to always remember. I mean, I'm feeling like a lot of these comments are coming from questions are coming from family members, and I wanted to make 2 points. So, when you're a family member and you see the person you love, you know, behaving in such a strange and scary way because of the effects of their mental illness and or their substance use, you know, it's scary. It's just scary to be there, and you want to do something to fix it because you love the person and you want them to get better. The thing to keep in mind is, first of all, in the moment, you don't have power to fix them. So there you are in that situation in the moment. And one thing to keep in mind is somewhere in there, inside that psychosis, inside that intoxication, is still the person that you love, who loves you. And when you're talking to that person, when you're talking, try to talk to that person. Because somewhere in there, there's a very scared and vulnerable person who needs to hear something from you. And it's not going to be like magic, like all of a sudden they're going to get better. But that's the thing that you can do. So that's point one. Point two is, you know, when we went into this thing with Lori and Chuck, we didn't know who was going to be the audience. And we met all our old friends who are providers and run big organizations and stuff. But the questions are coming from family members. And we're familiar with that. And I'll just tell you what I'm learning just from listening to your questions is how many of you feel like you're in these situations by yourself. So you're asking us situations about, we don't know your person, we don't know anything about your situation, but the questions are reflecting like, I'm a family member, I love somebody, and I have no clue what to do because my person is out of control and I can't get them help and they're psychotic and I don't know how to do this and da-da-da-da. So this is the most important thing, okay? You're not supposed to know this. You need to get help for you so you have a team that can help you with your loved one, okay? So very often what family members do, and we have a lot of experience with this, the family member comes and says, I have a person with a problem, please fix them. And then they'll send them to a program and they'll go to this place for co-occurring special treatment, and then they'll get discharged, and then they fall apart, and then they go over there, and then they go over there. And the family member feels like they're like a third wheel. So in these kind of situations, the person needs an empathic, hopeful, integrated, strength-based relationship, and so does the family. Now, in the best of all worlds, one team will work with everybody, because if you're closely connected, you know, you're getting coached as to how to help your person along with the professionals. But if whatever reason your person's not engaged, you still need a team. You need a team that's going to work with you up and down, no matter what happens to your person. You need a team that's not contingent on the person's connection to a particular program. You need a team that's going to help you figure out what to do. And if that team also helps your person, great. But if they don't, you still need a team to help you. So go find one. And the things you're looking for, are they welcoming? Are they hopeful? Do they welcome you guys as you are? Are they willing to sit with you and learn your experience and help you figure out how to engage with your person? Are they willing to meet the person you're talking to, not necessarily to fix them, but you know, you can go to the person and say, hey, you know, mom and dad are getting help, and that person would like to meet you because you're somebody we care a lot about. So can you come in and meet them? It would be helpful to us for them to get to know you. Okay, and then they feel like, oh, okay, I'm a helpful relative, just like mom and dad were helpful relatives when I was hospitalized. Okay, and you're building something for the long haul because you need that. And then you have somebody who knows you in your situation that you can ask these questions to, because they know what's going on.
Okay. One thing that that really strikes a chord too. You know, Chuck was emergency trauma for most of his life, and he said whenever there's chaos going on and the police are there and they're handcuffing people to the beds and the dogs are in there barking and police are flying and fists are flying, said the one thing he said, you take a deep breath and you go in there calm. And he said he told me of a situation where someone was really, really out of control, and everyone, they were fighting, it was escalating. And he said to the policeman, just uncuff him. And he sat on the bed and looked at the person.
I'll
What?
tell you, this is kind of an interesting story. And you guys, when I say all you guys, but especially Ken, Christy, you might enjoy this. First of all, I'm just going to make a blanket statement that should be obvious pretty much, maybe not to everybody, that an emergency department is the worst place to bring somebody who is having a psychotic break. Specifically because it is in contradistinction to all of the things that you have just said in your lecture. It is not a welcoming place. It's not meant to be a welcoming place. You might think it might be, because it should be a welcoming place to people who have medical problems. But that's the actual key, is that the people who work in emergency rooms don't really consider psychiatric problems medical problems. And so people with psychiatric problems who show up in an emergency room are blatantly unwelcome from the very person that they walk in the door, to everybody else who treats them, because they think that the people who work in emergency rooms, from the doctors on down, think that these people are just wasting their time, and they have a lot more important things to do than deal with people who have psychiatric problems. What Lori's alluding to is, and believe me, I was one of those people for many, many decades, not only years, but decades. I had important things to do. I had people with heart attacks and people who needed surgery, and I had nothing to offer people with psychiatric problems, let alone full-blown psychosis or psychotic episodes. So after quite a few years, let's say 30, 35 years or so being an
Learner.
You see, it's a pace of progress, Chuck, just like we talked about.
I started dabbling in the whole aspect of delivering services to people who had serious mental illness, or any mental illness for that matter. And just a cute little example of what I came to see is that there was like an orchestrated play going on when a person who was brought in, especially by paramedics or the police. Everybody had a role to play. You know, the paramedics who were annoyed that they even had to deal with this patient, and they were embarrassed they had to bring him to the emergency room, and the cops who were there to provide some serious muscle in case there was too much acting out on the part of the person who was in a psychiatric problem. So usually it was brought in by either paramedics or the police, and they put in a big room. On this one particular day, I came to see this as like just a play. You know, the police had their part, the paramedics had their part, the person in psychosis had his part, the nurses were disdainful of everything that was going on. And I walked into the room, and there was all of this commotion going on. And giant, the guy was screaming on the stretcher. The police were trying to hold him down, the EMTs were trying to hold him down, the nurses were doing the best they could to, I don't know what, put oxygen on them, start a line, whatever nurses do with people who come in by paramedics. And I walked into the room and it was all this activity. And I just said, I must say, rather sharply, I said, stop, just like that. And everybody in the room stopped, including the supposedly psychotic patient on the stretcher. And they all looked at me. And they stopped what they were doing. And I went and I sat, like Lori said, I sat down on the bed and I started talking to the guy and I asked him, what are you doing here? And we just had a reasonable conversation. It was amazing. Now, I only bring this example just to kind of bolster what you guys have been saying. There is another way to go about treating complex patients, besides going through the play that everybody goes through that I watched for 40 years.
No, Chuck, I mean, that's a brilliant story. And of course, we've worked over the years with many emergency settings and hospitals and stuff. And what you described is completely accurate. And, the thing that is paradoxical is everybody's feeling like, oh, this is the last person I want to see. I don't want them. I wish they were gone. And of course, the more you wish that and the more you act that way, the worse it is. And so when people say, well, why should I be welcoming? And we say, well, for one thing, it's going to make your life better. And, the person's going to be there anyway. You can either hate it or love it. So it's much better if you organize yourself to love it, because then everything will flow smoothly. And the same thing applies to all these other principles, although, we don't have time to go into the details, but just the thing we were saying about being strength-based, for example. If you're working with somebody and they start to go backwards and you immediately start to criticize them, you're going to have a struggle on your hands. But if you instead, sit with them and engage folks and say, let's go over your hopeful goals and talk about all the beautiful work you've been doing, round of applause for you. And can we build on any of that to figure out how to keep you going forward? You're in a whole different kind of conversation. And so much of what we do everywhere, family members, programs, emergency rooms, starts in the wrong place and makes it worse. So all of this about is they're really very simple things to do differently, but they're hard because so much of what we've built, like the play you described, where everybody has their role and their procedure and they follow it. So much of the way we've built our delivery system is built backwards. Okay, so it seems really hard. And if we just build it the right way, it would be a lot easier and we'd all be having a lot more fun. So that's kind of our approach.
So I have another question that, and then we'll be wrapping up shortly, but another question talking about court-ordered treatment and how to do that. And we recently had 2 other psychiatrists talking about medication, and they started as caseworkers. And what I loved about their response about court-ordered treatment, they look at the person and they said that if they can get someone on court-ordered treatment, they can generally engage with them, even because it's court-ordered, and say, I know you didn't want this, no one wants this, and then they start trying to interview to see what the person wants in their life. And the person doesn't really want to be on court-ordered treatment, but they want to drive a car, right? So they start that way. So what are your opinions on court-ordered treatment, and is it the same philosophy? Try to get their buy-in and sell it, because if they're going to be on court-ordered treatment, they're going to be on court-ordered treatment, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, you're absolutely right, Lori. I mean, you actually explained it very well. So I won't want to. So, and I'm going to take it just a little step further because we're talking about co-occurring. So, the thing about and Arizona, some of you guys may know, some of you guys definitely know, Arizona, because of the Arnold case, has a court-ordered treatment framework that's much more powerful, controlling, paternalistic, than almost any other state. And there are good things about that in terms of the ability to get people connected to treatment that keeps them engaged on medication, whether they want to be or not. And there are bad things about that, you know, because it becomes very easy to use the tool of the court mandate as a substitute for the work of engagement. So first of all, when somebody is court ordered for some piece of their care, it's always important, more important than ever, to engage them and figure out how to empower them, because otherwise their default is just going to be to become passive and helpless and actually regress and struggle against the court order. You know, it's almost like you create an unruly teenager who tries to manipulate you, and then you become more controlling, and that's just bad. So the thing you described is exactly on target. One of the tricky things about things like court ordering around things like medication, let's say when you have somebody with a co-occurring disorder, part of the art here is, you know, they may be mandated to take medication, and the court order may have some requirement about their substance use. But while you can get somebody to be taking injectable long-acting antipsychotic medication, you can't mandate them to be sober in the same way. You have to engage them. And so one of the things that's part of the work is not just to get into this punitive control, and the court order says you can't use, and if you use, I'm going to lock you up, because you never make progress. So the court order allows that person to be on meds and able to be engaged. But the thing that's going to help them make better decisions and choices is relationship, hope, building on strength and capacity, and seeing that this is a path on the way to somewhere else. Okay, so and you know, because the substance use stuff, ultimately you can't give somebody sobriety decanate, even if you're giving them injectable naltrexone. They can still go out and get drunk. So you have to engage the person in a partnership where the choices they're making are about what, you know, in the service of their own experience of hope and empowerment.
You know, I would add, maybe it's a little bit of a different direction, but I would add that one of the things that happens when people are put on court-ordered treatment is that the person, and sometimes ourselves, we feel like, you know, we're engaged in this kind of competitive relationship. Like maybe the person perceives us as a, you know, a tool used by the court to make them do things. Sometimes we as providers just sort of innocently fall into the framework of, well, maybe that's actually what's expected of me because I have a judge telling me that certain things have to happen by certain time frames. So therefore it's my responsibility to have those things happen. And so just reshuffling and saying, like, the contingency of court-ordered treatment is something that's just real. Okay, it's not put on by the treater. It's not put on by the client. It's put on by the judge. And it is the judge's issue. It is the issue that the judge is focusing on. We have an opportunity to be able to have the judge focus on the things that are going well, not just the things that might not be going so well. But we can only do that if we're on the same side. And so the obligation of the care provider is to be a partner with this person to help them negotiate the external contingency, not to be an extension of the court. And there are lots of things that the courts are doing now. That the courts are becoming much more facile with this. There are many, many courts across the country that are absolutely brilliant.
Both civil and criminal, because court-ordered treatment can mean lots of different things. So.
And so really helping the person experience the court and the authority of the court as helpful motivation to stay on track, really requires the judge and the court to know what the person is really doing and what they're capable of in that moment. And the conveyor of that information is the treatment team along with the person. So if the treatment team is not standing next to the person as the person is called before the judge again, the person is standing there all by themselves, and they can't completely convey all the goodness that has happened. Even if it's small steps, it's still goodness in the right direction that the person wouldn't have taken unless the court had been involved. So round of applause, judge, because you made a significant thing happen already in this person's life. And we're here as the treatment team, we're here, you know, to help stay on top of this and, you know, to help this person take their next step. And as the treatment team and the courts, we're in partnership to help this person.
Yep.
Well, with that, I wanted to thank you from the ACMI board. Several members are on. I think I saw Dick Junseth and Holly Giesel and Barb Honenberg and Lem Tamsky and Chuck and I are here. And I think this has been really insightful. And there were a lot of comments that want to know, who have you trained in the Valley? Because I'd like to go to providers.
In the Valley. Well, you'll have to ask some of the other people on the Mike and Christy and Vicky and, you know, because they know, we don't know who we trained.
Lots of.
I think your culture shines through on what Dr. Mike did with some of the lighthouses and the housing, with it making homes not rigid, not so many rules. Oh, you smoked a cigarette on the front porch. We told you that's it. You're evicted, you know? So, I mean, trying to meet the people where they're at and having it based on the person, not the program.
So, and Lori, as we said at the beginning, you know, obviously there might be a lot more detailed questions about all different kinds of things that people might have about how this applies in different programs and systems and circumstances. So people should feel free to email us and ask their questions, and we will figure out how to respond.
And the last question was, how did they get a certificate of attendance? If you send your first name, last name, and email, we're going to compile it, and then Diana Medina of COPA will send you a certificate of attendance. And we're working on getting certificate of education, continuing education credits, so that should be coming up in the future. But thank you guys, you were wonderful, and like I told you before, I want to sign up.
Okay. Sign up. Be a Zia partner.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for inviting.
It was terrific.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Lori. Thanks, Chuck. Bye-bye.
See you guys soon. Bye.